This is a
In fact, I was driving on Route 6 the other day, preoccupied with work. I work for the National Seashore here. I make maps. I do a lot of work with scientists here, and I've been in Truro for, 20 years. But I was driving quickly down Route 6, and I went, whoa, it said Mark Adams. There was a sign on the side of the road. It said Mark Adams. There must be some other Mark Adams here who was giving a talk. And then I went, oh, yes, that's me. But I'm going to talk a bit about how you don't have to be a saint. It has very little to do with that. That what you all do probably in your daily lives every day is a form of service that is just the kind of ordinary courtesy that we are right now very militantly denying to a lot of people on the move. Gosh, I hope to. Now, and Trish's cousin, Ariel, is doing actually one of the most contentious and difficult jobs, which is advising asylum seekers about what their rights are and how to prepare for interviews. And the system, not just in this country, but all over the world, is it's designed to give asylum, to offer an opportunity for someone who's displaced to have a normal life. But what that means is basically the rights of basic hygiene and security in your life. But the way the system's implemented, there are obstacles at every step to achieving this right. The interviewers in the asylum interviews do their best to try to find some inconsistency. They ask the migrants for a daily account of every country they passed through, every border they went through, what are the dates that you passed through, who did you see, and if they tell that story differently each time, then the story is discredited and they think you're making that up. You didn't really go through Turkey, you didn't really do what you said you're doing, so we're going to deny your claim. And I'll talk a little bit more about that process. I have to say I'm not an expert, but I have a certain experience from these 2 trips I did to Lesbos in Greece, and I'll talk a lot about that. I want to first mention these terms because they get thrown around a lot, sort of in a way by way of definitions. I'm just going to say that there's migrants, there's immigrants, there's displaced persons, there's refugees, there's asylum seekers, there's residents, and there's citizens. It's a spectrum. When it comes to migrants, there's economic migrants, there's political migrants, and more there's climate migrants. And, before, I'm going to hopefully hit on this more, but before long, I bet there's people in this room that will be migrants. And there's definitely people in this room who came from a history of migration. I mean, it's very difficult in the United States of America to go back more than one generation and not find immigrants. You know that. So, and then also, I want to link this to a kind of an idea of ecology, that migration is a form, is a feature of the ecology of the earth, and that animals migrate, and that animals depend on having an open path, having freedom of movement to a refuge. We have here on the beaches in Race Point, we have Arctic terns. They're somewhat rare here, but there's many terns, thousands of terns that use Cape Cod as a refuge in their travel. The Arctic terns are like the world-class migrant. They migrate 12,000 miles a year from pole to pole. And that strategy of migration is risky, and it provides a lot of benefits. And in a sense, we can see ourselves as animals in a system of the world that seek refuge in our lives. We find ways to make a living, to have our families. There's something like 70 million displaced people on the planet right now. I think something like 40 million of them are internally displaced in their own countries, and 20 to 25 million are displaced from their country to other countries. One other sort of horrifying fact is that in a particular year, let's say 2017, 15,000 children crossed the Mediterranean to seek asylum. Over 90% of those 15,000 children traveled alone. Anyway, let's see. Anyway, so with that, Toni Morrison, who's on our minds lately, this sort of popped up, and this is, the sense in which we may be saints is to apply this in our lives. We are brilliantly trained, we are free, and we are empowered. I would say most of the people in our community lay claim to those, and so that's our job, is to extend freedom and to empower others. Hopefully, I'm not going to get all preachy. If someone in the back could raise his finger if I started to preach, just say, bring it down, bring it down. I'm also a painter and an artist, and it's part of my work is to find a way to use my art to express some of these ideas and at least to provoke some ideas. And one of the things about the migration journey is that it echoes every kind of epic story of mankind, the Odyssey, and the biblical stories. And so I want to try to convey that in some of my artwork, that it's a noble and it's hazardous, but it's also noble to be pursuing refuge for your family and for your community. And so some of my artwork, I'm trying to find a way to say that without saying it too explicitly. These are some new pieces that will be in the schoolhouse soon. We all have the wonderful experience of camping and being sort of playing nomad, and it is a way of escaping our ordinary lives, but it's also a way of life for people who don't have the choice too. So it's a kind of a paradox. Anyway, in my day job, I get to measure the beach. We do all different ways of quantifying coastal change and tracking how the erosion is affecting our communities and what the waves and currents are doing. And then I get to talk about it. And I also get to teach sketchbook drawing through both Castle Hill, the Fine Arts Work Center, and the PAM. And I think this observation and documentation of what you see around you. Everyone here in the room is an expert in their own way. You bring a particular point of view. There's no one like you. If you go out and stand in high head at dawn and see raptors flying over and you record that in your notebook, that's a particular point of view, a particular moment that no one else has but you. So this is I'm preaching right now, but this is my sermon, that you are all witnesses to the world as it unfolds. I also think that it's important to understand that the world is made up of systems. This is my scientist talking, and these are systems of forces. There's waves and weather. There's some of it is just physics and gravity, and some of it is the ecological processes. And in order to live well, anyone who has a septic system knows about these things, right? There's a whole biology and ecology of your septic system. There's your well and your groundwater. We need to be good animals and understand how we live on the earth. And it's actually, I always say, I had a training session with some of the interpreters, and they said, some people say, is it safe? Should we leave Cape Cod? Should we, where is it sustainable to live? Well, I think that actually a place like Truro is one of the best and most sustainable places to live, because we are actually in touch with our resources. We're in touch with where our water comes from and where it goes. And we have, anyway, enough about that. But so anyway, in my work, We monitor the changes. We live in this wonderfully dynamic environment. We live with it. We try not to get in the way of it. We respond when we have to, and we accommodate nature. And so these are just a few sketches and as much as possible, we get out in it, and paddle right into that seasonal flock of pelagic shearwaters that just happen to be on the spit that normally you'd have to go way out in the open ocean to see. And you see this was a couple of summers ago in August when the menhaden and the mackerel and the shearwaters were all creating this huge food chain right in front of us. And we're just waiting around in wonder, watching them all hunt and have their strategies of survival. That was my tribute to Pat DeGroot, who went out in her kayak every day. And then this is actually from the Atlas of the 1700s. This is what Cape Cod looked like for the arriving Europeans. Is the white cliffs of Truro, the tablelands of Massachusetts. And you wonder how they knew what they were looking at. But those are skills that they had. A few more images. I'm going to skip through the images pretty quickly because I want to get on to the story. But some of my preoccupations, both in nature and in observation, the elements of the natural world that to me are kind of exciting, and the idea of being immersed in it and jumping in the pond and being part of it. Boats are a big part of my work. I might want to come back to this. But this is a quote I found that it talks about the illusions of permanence, that we think our lives are static, and that there's a sensible narrative around it, but we're actually subject to the same elements of chance as any shipwreck, and we understand our lives by looking back at them and try to make sense of them. So this idea of being a saint, I think that this is kind of someone taught me this once, this idea that there's four components to kind of a healthy identity: animal, artist, hero, saint. And the animal and the artist are taking care of your own physical and emotional needs. The hero is someone who takes care of the needs of others, but very publicly, for applause, for thanks. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. We need those people. And the saint is the one who does it quietly, secretly, and maybe is never known to have done any for the good that they've done. But if you try and be a saint without being a good animal, then it's really not going to work. So it's okay. I think let's skip that. So migration. Let's talk about migration. This is the original. This is where humans came from Africa, and within a very short time spread around the world. The original migration. I think it's just really stunning how tenacious and what wanderers humans were from the very start. These are in thousands of years. How long it took for humans to populate the entire planet. Nothing stopping them. And then you talk about the sort of aliens or the outsiders and insiders in those populations. These were kind of the remnant Neanderthal populations in Europe at the time when sapiens sort of overwhelmed them. This is where the last holdout Neanderthals were. But it just kind of rings for me that there's always an other, an outsider. And then, so these are where people are coming from and where they're going nowadays. The migration patterns. And we'll say more about that. But again, I'm not an expert. I pulled these off the internet, but there's our Central American migration route, and then there's the 3 routes of the Mediterranean from Morocco to Spain. 3 main routes. There's the most dangerous and just heartbreaking route is from Libya and Tunisia to Italy, and then the place where I worked, which was from Turkey to Greece. These are all the doorways to Europe, the doorways to this asylum process, the long journey before you even start you're trying to fight for your status as an asylum grantee. And this is something, and then of course just symbolically, the animals that migrate, free movement throughout the planet. That is a wonder of nature. It's kind of a feature, monarchs, which have been so abundant lately. And then whenever some obstacle is put in their way, there's a kind of an ancient instinct that makes them push on against that obstacle. So again, I made a show that was about refuges, migration and refuge, on this very theme of both animals and humans. I'm going to skip through this because this is the particular story that I learned firsthand was this last step in that Mediterranean journey from Turkey to Lesbos to Greece, and it's really it's kind of almost the same distance as from Woods Hole to Martha's Vineyard. Just a little further. But, people who have been traveling for months and sometimes years and being beaten, first, being displaced by war or by oppression, and then traveling for months and sleeping in the woods, giving up pretty much everything they have. A lot of people have a little stash of money, and this last step in the journey costs about $3,000 to $5,000 for a seat in one of these boats from a smuggler. And again, the definitions are really interesting. There's traffickers and there's smugglers. And traffickers are actively exploiting people, and they are the worst. Smugglers actually see themselves as doing a service because they're providing a seat in this boat. They're providing a bridge in that last step of this journey that's gone on for months and years. And once they arrive in Greece, they're in Europe, and they can begin their asylum process. But these boats are the cheapest possible boats. They're shoved offshore with no one to drive the boat and no one to pilot them, often at nighttime, often in not the best weather conditions, and they're overcrowded, and the boats don't float very well, the life jackets don't work, and so often it's a child that goes missing, You just anyway. That's and there are many relief organizations, and if anybody's interested in the nuts and bolts of volunteering, you can volunteer to teach English in a classroom in a village. You can volunteer to walk the shoreline at night with binoculars and scout for these boats. There's every level, every kind of amenity these people need that is normal to us, you can volunteer and offer to provide. Simple things. But the scouts that walk the shoreline are not allowed to help the refugees. If they see a boat landing, they have to contact the Coast Guard immediately. And if they help someone out of a boat without the Coast Guard present, then they can be prosecuted for human smuggling. So there's a big official role, and there's a lot of conflict. The Turkish Coast Guard is in conflict with the Greek Coast Guard, and then there's a what's it called? I'll think of it in a second. There's an EU Coast Guard that is comprised of boats from all countries in Europe, and some of the Turkish Coast Guard tries to push the boats back to shore. The Greek Coast Guard will try to bring them into shore. And then there's refugee relief workers, which I'll show examples of, who these are actual photographs on the near Italy, where these overloaded boats just not seaworthy and didn't have anyone to guide them ashore. It's more drawings than my own, but the refugee relief organizations. Let's see. It can seem kind of superfluous to show those pretty pictures, but again, another hero, Anthony Bourdain, who said this really makes such perfect sense. It's a plus for everybody. Okay, so I connected with this group through a London-based organization called helprefugees.org. And it was started by a woman who was a tour manager for Coldplay, the rock band. And she had been doing impossible things for the lead guy. Who's the lead guy in Coldplay? Chris Martin. Chris Martin would say, I want an ice bath before I go on stage. And they'd be like, I'm pouring the ice bags into a tub and getting it ready for it. And finally she goes, I'm going to do this for people who really need it. I'm going to do impossible things for people who really need it. So she started this organization with 5 of her friends. And they fund 40 different on-the-ground relief organizations, from daycare to women's centers to food distribution to English classes. And they're the coolest people. I got to visit a lot of their projects. They started their organization by going to Calais when there was a camp that was known as the Jungle, before there was any organization, any structure to the relief work. And there were 20-something women, 20 years old, 25 years old, and they did those. Their stories are the most fearless stories I've heard. Read about Calais. There's a show that's touring. It's called The Jungle, right? Yeah, that was at the St. Anne's Warehouse in.
Coming back there.
Well, okay, great, because it's really worth seeing, but it puts you in the shoes of the refugees there. She told us about basically smuggling kids in refrigerator trucks out of Calais as the camp was burning, about people getting phone calls in a party in Brooklyn that the kids were stuck in a refrigerator truck and needed assistance in having that information relayed back to the police, and basically sort of taking some of these kids in and being responsible for them for enough time to get them into some kind of care. There's one other really interesting concept is, okay, so I'm teaching English. When I arrived, they gave me a couple English classes to teach without any preparation or training. And I had this advanced English class where we would pick questions out of a box and we'd say, let's have a discussion. So we pulled the question, when does childhood end? And the mostly Afghan people in my group, they said, what is childhood? And I said, well, it's when you're not an adult, you're a child. And I said, well, childhood ends when I can tell my left hand from my right hand, because then I have to work. But then one of the others said, childhood ends when you fall in love. And it just shows that there's this humanity behind the question. But throughout, even in Greece, there's really not a concept of adolescence. That you are in your family's care until you are not in your family's care. And there's a lot of 15, 16, 17-year-olds who have made the migration journey and are functioning as adults without all the tools to be an adult. And they actually have a system of creating foster parents for them, which are foster in name only. The parents only exist as signatures on a card. And that allows them to get housing. It allows them to get services because they officially are in foster care. But we have this very unique idea about taking care of our children until they're, I don't know, 24. My parents are great. Anyway, so the great thing about helprefugees.org is it's a very grassroots organization. They some of their principles, they're very independent. It's very important to be non-political, to not openly take sides, or allow any government or even journalistic advocacy. It's a really tricky thing to do. So one of the 40 organizations that's supported by Help Refugees is this place called One Happy Family, started by 5 people, mostly Swiss, and it's I'll show you a picture of it. It's a day center. Actually, this is kind of a little out of place. This is one of my other favorite organizations is this Free Movement Skateboarding. If you go on Instagram, free movement _ SB for skateboarding, they teach refugee kids how to skateboard, and they create kind of moving skate parks around Athens and other cities. And it's just totally heartbreaking and beautiful to see these little Syrian girls with their elbow pads and their helmets learning to skateboard, bringing a joy into their lives. But anyway, so let's skip through these. This is one of my sketchbook pages. There's the camp in Lesbos. You can see how close Lesbos is to Turkey. It's very present. And so this day center, One Happy Family, is just around the corner past the smokestacks. You could walk to, I stayed in the main capital, the harbor town, which is very much like Provincetown in the size and scale of it. And then we'd go every day. This is one of the restored boats at the place. The Coast Guard, really intimidating big boats in the harbor all the time. This is one of the rescue boats that goes out and meets the rafts. So they're required to go by Coast Guard rules. They'll get a radio call that there's a boat, and they'll go out to meet it. But they can't assist the boats unless there's a distress call. And there's two kinds of distress calls. Maybe some of you who are sailors or boat operators know this. There's a pan-pan, and there's the Mayday, right? And pan-pan means it's not life-threatening. It means your boat's sinking, your boat's disabled, you're in trouble, but the lives aren't at stake. That's pan-pan. Mayday is when you're in danger of being in the water, that there's a threat to life. And the Turkish Coast Guard won't let them declare Mayday. They always use pan-pan, which limits the ability of the rescuers to go and assist. If it's a pan-pan, they may not have permission to actually assist them. It's really strange to throw these obstacles to them. But this is actually, that was the only boat, the only rescue boat in Lesbos. And there'll be, maybe each week 2 to 5 of those pontoon dinghies will come in with 50 people on each boat at unknown times of the day or night. This is the life jacket graveyard. They throw all the life jackets into this landfill, and it's actually almost like a living memorial. And in a way, it's very haunting, but in a way, it's kind of encouraging too, because that means all those people made it onto this. They walked onto the soil of Greece. I drew a picture of it. They have services. I'm looking for my husband, brother, son, wife to identify people who are missing. This is actually the camp in Athens, Skaramangas. And again, I'm really impressed with, this is the good life. After spending months and months traveling and being possibly beaten and robbed and exploited in a lot of ways, this is relative security. 2 families per unit. It's baking in the sun on an old cargo lot in the Athens port. There's really nothing for them to do. They're not locked in. They can walk through the fence. They can go to town and buy vegetables. Some people do bring a little money and they can go and maybe. But they're very limited in things like they can't get a driver's license. They can't ride a scooter or motorcycle. They can't, of course, can't get a job. I don't know about bicycles. But yeah, they're very limited in anything that requires registration or a license. They're limited healthcare, their clinics. The volunteers create clinics. They have legal advice. There's the camps like that. The first thing that happens is they'll set up a beauty salon, barbershop, beauty salon, a little corner stall with vegetables and candy. These people have been used to creating their lives from scratch, so they're kind of entrepreneurial in a way. Just think of yourself, if you had to suddenly make a living with nothing, but the barbershops and the beauty salons are meeting places and hangouts, and there's the shisha pipes, they smoke the hookahs, and it's a happy place. I'm going to skip through more of my pages. I was going to try and read some of these, but so here's the one happy family. It consists of this big dining hall and a garden, basketball and soccer pitches. So there's a little library. There's a yoga tent, shisha lounge, a little medical clinic. There's a gym. The gym is kind of hilarious. It's an outdoor spot with weights and heavy bags for kicking. And when they unlock this place in the morning, people have walked 40 minutes from the camp to come and spend the day here with some of these amenities. And you just see these guys, these young Afghans, they run straight to the weights and the pull-up bars, and they just start doing pull-ups as fast as they can. And you can just imagine the pent-up energy from being confined in those container units and wanting to just live and expend energy. And the kids, I had to do playground duty, which actually was quite terrifying. They have a little, a nice little adventure playground which someone donated and built with a swinging bridge and slides, and nobody's there. And I unlock the gate, and all of a sudden there's a dozen 4-year-olds in there, and they're all running in circles and sometimes fighting. And I'm like, I only have English. No fighting. At one point, they're all screaming, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? What's going on? And they're pointing, and they're standing on tiptoes. And in the sandbox, and I go down and I look closely at the ground, there's a spider in the sandbox. And so you just imagine the dangers and things that they've been through. And these fears are just normal fears that children have. So, I made a little space and moved it out. But, there was one little boy who was really afraid to come in. Come in, do the slide. And later his father came and said, no, he is my boy, you cannot. He apparently he didn't want to get dirty. Had a beautiful shirt on, and family, expectations. Anyway, so this is the kitchen. This little shed on the back is where we made 1,000 to 1,500 hot lunches per day, and it was the most rewarding thing we did. I mean, we had two full-time cooks, one from Zimbabwe, a Rohingya from Myanmar, and everyone wanted to be a kitchen helper. All of the volunteers. There were a dozen volunteers, including me, who were mostly European. And in the morning, we'd get assignments for the day of all these duties, and we all wanted to be in the kitchen handing out the bowls of food, because they would crank up the Kurdish hip-hop music, and everybody be dancing, and they would line up the women on one side and the men and the children, and we would hand out the bowls as fast as we possibly could. We had a couple burners in the floor, rice and bulgur, or one day a week there'd be chicken, but it'd always be secret what day that would be, so that we wouldn't be overrun by people that day. But we would prepare these bowls and hand them out as fast as we possibly could. Really good food, really tasty. And I got into the rhythm of their day, and ate what they ate, and it just felt really good to do that. And then as soon as we're finished passing them out, then we're rounding them up and washing them by hand. This is so it's interesting what the organizations are that run these things. This is okay.
Use battery.
Or is that my battery?
You're showing on the screen. Low battery.
Okay. Let's see. There should be a place to plug in. Is there any place to plug in?
Yeah, there is.
Sorry about that.
You get out here for a minute.
Okay.
I'll go
That's
right
right.
underneath this. Okay. Try that.
Might take a minute.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, I can keep going. Yeah. So let's see. We talked about all the services in the day center. So the other things, actually, I love to actually do trash. Because I wanted to be busy all day. I wanted to really just spend my day.
Might press.
I think it just has to charge up a little
Oh,
bit.
there
There it comes,
go.
yeah.
There.
But you know, you want to do the thing that no one wants to do, and so as far as let's see, as far as trash goes, hopefully this will come right up. Yeah, we wanted, we were trying to save bags, and so I'd be like hauling around these giant. Oh, do we need to?
Actually, just keep talking. and
Okay, we'd be kind of like pulling the bags out of the bins and combining them to save bags, and so I'd be up to my elbows in gravy and hauling these heavy bags around. And they have a bunch of long-term refugees who are security guards who keep the place running. And this dude from Ghana, he comes up to me and he goes, "Mr. Mark, why are you handling the trash?" And like, well, it's what I want to do. I'm helping. I just want to help. And he says, "In my country, no one as important as you would touch trash." And I'm like, well, in my country, we all have to do that. And he said, "Well, you are my hero." And if that's what it takes, just to do some of the dirty jobs, they're not even hard, really. It's not difficult. But he became most of the people that I met would come every day. Several hundred of them came every day to our center, and we even set aside time in the schedule for hugs and for handshakes. And when they would come in the morning, when we unlock the gates, they'd be waiting, and they'd want to go around and shake everyone's hand and give you a hug. And some organizations have strict rules about this, that no physical contact. In some cases, it is a good idea to keep some distance, but it's also, at least in this case, it felt like a part of the service that we could do is to extend this kind of like friendship. Some of them will be there for many months and even a couple of years. So that question, like why, how long does it take, and when will they get to go to the next stage?
I'll get a chance to go to the next stage.
Right. They don't necessarily get that.
Right.
So what happens is, if you're from Syria, if you're from a war zone, then pretty likely that on your first hearing, you'll at least be granted the first step towards asylum. But that hearing, it takes months and months to get your first hearing. So Ariel and the other legal advocates would be coaching them. It would take them, maybe 10 months to a year to get the first hearing. And the hearing could be canceled if there's no translators. They do them by Skype sometimes. There's so many things that can get in the way of getting your first hearing, even if you came directly from the war zone. The people who didn't come from a war zone, which is actually Afghans and, come on. So, how do I get that Apple TV connection? Okay, so anyway, it's okay. I've given you the idea, and I have a few more slides, but it might be a good time to open it up. But I'll just finish this. A good 70% of the people have no real hope of getting asylum. They'll get their first hearing within a year or so. They'll get denied, and they have 2 chances for appeals. And those, again, might take many months between appeals, so you could be in the appeal process for several years. If you're from Afghanistan, if you're from sub-Saharan Africa, if you're from Iran, pretty likely you'll have to go through all that appeal process. And some people, sometimes men would go alone and leave their wives behind, leave their children behind. Sometimes the men would send their wives and children ahead of them, and part of the tragedy of that is that they'd be on different cycles. They wouldn't be all synchronized in this time frame, so they wouldn't get, even if they were able to get asylum, wouldn't happen at the same time. But the family separation is very heartbreaking. I also met. We made banners and crafts. So it was International Women's Day, and we made a big banner, and we had everyone write something in their own language on the banner. And there was this kid it was Rohingya kid, and I said, "Come on, dude, write something in your language, whatever, it doesn't matter." And he says, "Well, I speak 5 languages, but I don't write any language because I left home when I was 11. I haven't been to school. I never learned to write." But he obviously knew the world in some ways much better than I did. But he was alone. He's been traveling alone since he was 11. He's 18 now. And one of the things we did, which they loved, was there's an online geography game called Cetera, Seterra. Anyone can do it. You can go to the website. It gives you a geography test. It'll give you a map of the world, or a map of the EU, or a map of North America, and it'll time you and say, where's Saudi Arabia? Where's Kansas? Where's Nicaragua? And you have to identify them. And these guys were good. They knew their countries. Anyway, so what happens if you don't get asylum? If you are denied, you're up for deportation. And you'd be sent back to the last country outside of Europe, which would be Turkey, probably. But fortunately, too, the bureaucracy is very inefficient. And when I was there, people were rarely getting sent back. They were rarely being rounded up. But you live in fear, and a lot of people would kind of hide out. So you could stay in the camp. You get some kind of allowance. There's food there. But it's a life in limbo. And who knows what's going to happen. Let's see. So one thing I wanted to mention is that any amenity that we can bring to their lives is that brings it back to kind of a normal life, the way that we enjoy. One of the things they would love to do a couple afternoons a week, we put somebody's phone on a Bluetooth speaker and dance. And mostly the guys would get up and dance in a circle. And some of the European volunteers would dance, women would dance with them. Occasionally okay, now we're stuck. I think, oh, there we go. All right. There we go. And, but we had amazing dance parties, and, these people are so full of joy. Sorry, it's not really playing right, but you get the idea. Kite day, we had these trust exercises, English classes, which it was really embarrassing that, I'm teaching them the alphabet. Some of them were just learning the alphabet for the first time, 25-year-old Afghan men. But there's no way that I'm going to learn or remember their names, even written out in the English alphabet. And every time we say, like, what is this? C blank T, cat, and there'd be all this discussion in Farsi and Dari in the Kurdish language all throughout the room. What is cat? And then they'd agree on what it was, and they would tell me. And often there'd be the women who come in groups. There'd be mostly men, but women who come to the class in groups. And sometimes there was this one beautiful 12-year-old girl who really knew it all. She was the smartest one in the room, but she always looked up at her mother, sort of for permission to answer the question, and then she would tell all the men in the room, what a cat is, for example. But when you think of your pride, we're adults, and just think of yourself. in another country where you don't understand a thing, and you have to really just discard your pride altogether. And we know this. You've seen this. You meet someone who doesn't speak English, and you speak louder to them. You go, "It's a cat," and you think that that's going to help them understand. We really need to learn how to put ourselves in other people's shoes. In this case, in the advanced English class, I was looking for things to talk about. I just happened to have a copy of Mary Oliver's poem, "The Summer Day," which, I'll bet half of you in the room could recite the last line of that poem. Can anyone? Anyone? What will you do with your one wild and precious life? What have I been doing all day? I've been lying in the field. Why shouldn't I? Isn't life short? Doesn't everyone die? What will you do with your one wild and precious life? And I'm reading that with these people who really don't have the freedom to think that way. They'd love to repair computers, have a cleaning business, do a salon. They'd love to do the most ordinary things that we take for granted, let alone get a PhD or, but they really responded to the poem because they're human like us. They're like, yeah, I'm a dreamer, I'm a poet. So we did geography, Women's Day, we did banners in Farsi and Dari in English, stories. I love that. I'm gonna kind of skip towards the end, and feel free to get your questions ready or comments. This is we did a little march against the Dublin Agreement, which was an agreement in the EU that allowed made it much easier to send refugees back to Turkey. And as they were marching by, I did the sketch, and there it is. And it's kind of, everything has this kind of ironic feeling to it. This is a statue from at the end of the Ottoman Empire, I believe. Somebody here could correct my history, but the exchange between Greece and Turkey, all the Turks in Greece were sent back to Turkey, and all the Greeks in Turkey were sent back, and it really just disrupted many generations of people who had lived in these neighboring countries, but by the political agreement said they all had to be returned. And so many people have lived for a couple generations since the 20s with this memory, this kind of passed along memory of these lives that were disrupted. And so that's what that statue represents, the disruption. A lot of rooftop parties. Okay, so I did a series of portraits of some of my refugee friends, and just to me, and I gave them to them. These are they kind of loved the recognition. They loved, sort of in a way, it's like bearing witness. That's my friend Abdul from Ghana. Honey, she's worked in the kitchen. Ahmad and Fifi from Zimbabwe. And I forget her name. This dude they had a maker shop where they made things out of recycled materials. They made, stoves and, out of reflective material, and they made pumps, and it was just based on the principle of reusing and recycling. Aslam, who was the fixer, he's this Syrian refugee who had a little money, and somehow he couldn't leave. He didn't have any status to leave, but he also he's like radar and MASH. How radar could like somehow come up with trucks and airplanes and really ran the whole war. This guy could do that. We'd be sitting in a cafe and they'd say, we need 250,000 pounds worth of disposable diapers for northern Greece. We're out, and it's going to last us too much. And he'd go on his laptop and go, got it. We found it. We found a donor. We're sending the diapers to Greece, and those, anyway. And he drew me. And I drew them as kind of their dream person. Some of them wanted to be a computer programmer. This is the blue stamp that you get if you achieve the first level of asylum status. just a piece of paper with a blue stamp. And this guy in the middle, David, he now was able to leave the island, which is both exhilarating but also terrifying, because now he's sent alone from this community to the big city of Thessaloniki, where he'll have to do what we all would have to do if we had no money and had to start our lives from scratch. But the dude has a lot going on. I'm going to skip to the end, I think. So my sketchbook pages, skateboard park, squatter settlement in Athens. Sorry about this, but I think I want to turn it over to you. And this is a Syrian cook that started his own little pop-up restaurant, and just enormous amounts of food. And this is Samos, which is at a different stage than Lesbos. It's an island in the south, about 4 hours south of Lesbos, where there's a new avenue of migration through Samos, but no facilities at all. Barely a camp. There's a camp that holds 1,000 people that has 6,000 people living in it. There's none of the organized. So I went and sat on the waterfront in this town and drew with the kids that I met. Anyway, so I want to close with a couple of scary ideas. Let's see. The map on the bottom is kind of the displaced persons map. People are leaving the red countries for the yellow ones. The map on the top is the zones where climate change is going to bring the most stress, the places that are going to be unlivable due to climate change. So far, climate refugees are a small part of the flow, but it's really possible that it could triple the flow of refugees, climate change. Temperatures, famines, agriculture, water. I think so this was in the Times, maybe today or yesterday. Today in the Times. These are countries that are running out of water. And so, you don't hear about the refugee crisis except, in U.S. politics at the border here and but what you need to know is that it's not going to go away. Our attention will wander. The news outlets will find interesting things to tell us. They may ignore it, but it's going to be a very dominant theme for generations to come. What I'd like to say, a couple things I'd like to say. This is one thing I'd like to say. Choose love. So, thank you very much. So, wow, cool. I think we've been sitting for a while, so if people want to talk for a bit, I'll stay around a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
How did the different nationalities get along with each other?
Good question. So that's one really interesting part of this. So the question is, how do the different refugee communities get along with each other? And the fact is that they come from communities where there's already a lot of tension, and in some cases, if not exactly war, but bloodshed. And it's a constant problem. And in the camp, there's really no police in the camp. So the camp on Lesbos has 6,000 to 8,000 people in it. They kind of self-organize, but the two organizations that manage the camp very loosely are the UNHCR and the EU. And one of the things they do is give priority to women and children and families. They try to create separate fenced areas for vulnerable populations, children that are alone, adolescents, single women. But right before I got there was a kind of a mob brawl in the camp because they had tried to eject a bunch of Arab men who were living in a trailer and give it to some Kurdish families. And so all of the reasons for conflict were like embedded in that moment. And the women and children ended up running away from the camp, camping in the woods. And when stuff like that happens, there's really no recourse because they can't bring in the police and say, okay, you guys, you're under arrest. We're gonna, we're gonna prosecute you in court for violence. There's even rapes that occur in the camp, and they'll pull people out of the camp temporarily. But there is no enforcement that they can do because if they try to impose a criminal justice system in the camp, they'll just create more tension. So, yeah.
You see all these folks at the end point. How do they navigate and negotiate these hundreds of miles through alien territories? Just basic hygiene, food. Is there some like Underground Railroad, or they just have to go by their own wits?
There's really nothing like the Underground Railroad. There are kind people everywhere, and there are relief organizations all along the way. But a good source for the story, there's tons of narratives. There's Patrick Kingsley with a K. He writes for The Guardian, and he's written a book. If you just look up Patrick Kingsley, you'll see his book, and he followed a whole bunch of different refugees and told their story of that exact journey. There's squats. They live in abandoned buildings. There are soup kitchens and things along the way. My friend from Ghana, Abdul, he talked about he came via Libya. And he had to come all the way around from Africa through Turkey, and he said it wasn't a good choice for me to get on the boat, but it was the only choice I could make. And he described being beaten by the police, sleeping in the woods, trying to find a smuggler who would give him a seat on a boat, and at one point being chased by the police. And he said, and there was a woman who collapsed, and he didn't know her, and he stayed with her, and so he got handcuffed to her. She ended up in shock because of an allergy or an illness. He was with her for months after that, shackled to her, staying in the hospital with her. He said, she's not my wife, she's not my mother, but I have to clean her. I take care of her, and then it is unimaginable. But again, you can put yourself in a position of it's human. How would we behave, if we had to band together with a community that's created by this kind of distress and help each other?
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the genesis of this for you, how you decided to get involved, and was there sort of a particular moment where that came into being?
Well, again, being very lucky, I cannot watch, even though I love Rachel Maddow and I love MSNBC and stuff, I get no satisfaction at all out of the political game. Even when we win, I feel like it's just kind of tawdry. I can't watch the debates. So I'm like, I cannot participate. And I was like, what? The best thing I can do is take someone who's an outcast and hand them a bowl. That felt like the most satisfying thing for me to do. And I have a friend who is a philanthropist and he works with a lot of organizations. And I said, Tom, set me up. What can I do? So I actually went with him and toured a bunch of projects, saw what they're doing, and I chose this one as the one that was closest to the ground. And again, as far as being a good animal or a good saint, it's so simple. You see people around town. I bet there's someone who volunteers to clean the library, or something. I bet there's people in town who just do volunteer work, just ordinary stuff. And it's the same. It's the same. If you want it, if people who want to explore this, I bet there's stuff in Hyannis where you could teach English. I bet there's stuff in Boston. You can go to the border, go to New Mexico. You can go to Texas and do exactly the same kind of work. I don't know much about the Central American refugee situation, except I do know that the Catholic Charities actually are doing some great work down there. And there's a group of nuns who are doing this work there's tons of other organizations too, but it's. So anyway, yeah, it's. I'm really happy that I chose to do that. I'm going to go back for a couple months this year, and I may go to Samos. Yeah, it's.
Are they allowing NGOs into Moria now?
They are, yeah. There are NGOs. It's a different situation to work actually in the camp because you're very limited on what you can do in the camp. I got to go into the camp a few times, and it's not terrifying at all. It's not. It's there's fences and barbed wire and things, but the gates are open. I had to sit for an hour at the gate of the camp watching people come and go, and it really felt like going to a mall in Providence because there's like kids with their baseball hats on backwards, there's women with strollers and headscarves, there's colorful tights, and it just seemed like an urban population, anywhere. But the camps are terrifying for some people, and we were told not to go to the camps. As volunteers, we were told not to go because of this idea that if most people would welcome us, but there may be someone there that wants trouble, and there's no one to bail you out if you get in trouble in camp. Yeah.
There was a time that I volunteered there as well, and there was a great field hospital. Shortly after we left, they made them take it down because it was too permanent. At that time, the population was still able to move in and out, move through. Capacity, I think, was the most 1,000, but now it's far more than that. And
Yeah.
there's many, many more nations in there. But they made them take down this beautiful field hospital that they had made because they said it was too permanent, and then now what has unfolded in the ensuing few years is just amazing. But they did also, they forbid any NGOs from going in there for a long time too.
Wow.
So because the Greek government was really clamping down on the independent organizations that were in there.
Yeah,
And they still do, as far as I know, but it's good, so they are allowing some.
They are.
protection at the camp now.
But it's a constant kind of like back and forth because, as you know, they don't want anyone to think that the camps are a country club. They don't want anyone to think that life is good in the camps and that these people are getting. It's weird, but don't make them comfortable. All of the amenities happen outside of the camp in these day centers and stuff. So if the camp starts getting too good, then somebody's gonna clamp down. But one of the coolest relief organizations that I ran to was called Watersheds, and it was a group of a couple dozen plumbers from England, from Wales, and they were going in there and installing water taps and drains, and digging ditches so that the sewage would flow around the tents instead of through them. I mean, the hygiene is abysmal in the camp, and they showed us one 6-inch pipe that was supposed to drain all the sewage from 8,000 people out of the camp. And when that sewage pipe gets clogged, then they turn off the water because they don't want any more water going in. So no water and no sewage. But there was one set of taps for hundreds of people, and people had to wash out diapers in that. They had to wash dishes. They had to drink water from that. There's a kitchen, and there's water passed out, and there's some food, but yeah, we talked a lot about what is the definition of basic human dignity, because this is what the UN Charter says should be provided, and it's hygiene and dignity, and it fails on that by any standard, but at least there's something. Yeah.
Do the people of Lesbos interact with the refugees?
I got to say that the Greeks are awesome. The Greeks are awesome, and they don't. I don't know. I think a large portion of them don't like the refugees. Lesbos is an island of say 60,000 people with 8 to 10,000 refugees. It's very, I was actually they're Muslims. Do they drink? Do they, and they party? Every night they'd be like, let's go to the cafe. Let's smoke and let's hang out in the cafe. And it's very cordial. the town is the Greeks themselves are out every night. You know, they socialize publicly. It's a part of the culture, and they're also very generous about sharing. In fact, I even heard stories that, you know, the gold standard is get your asylum and go to Germany. You know, but some people actually came back from Germany because the Germans are just not as friendly. They don't have that idea of sharing and enjoying their lives together. But you know, we got some looks. There's a party. The Golden Dawn, is it? Yeah, the Golden Dawn is the right-wing party in Greece, and they're not substantial, but they're powerful in Greek politics, and there is danger. In fact, in Athens, we went to a few of these. There's a couple old schools that are squats that are kind of a no-go zone for the police. You know, dozens and dozens of families live in these schools that have no plumbing and electricity, and the relief organizations were delivering bread and water, but they had to do it secretly because they could be attacked. The politics is so complicated, so they'd have proxy groups that would actually deliver the bread, and then the bread started becoming a currency, and people would trade bread for things and use the bread to coerce and exploit people. So then they installed some bread making equipment. Rather than giving them bread, they gave them the means to make bread. But when we walked past the squats, school number 9, they're like, we can't walk by it because we have to be neutral. We're relief workers. You just walk by, but don't stop and don't talk to anyone. Don't look. You know, and it's just it's really interesting. Yeah.
Are there adoptions of children who don't have families?
Actually, and you might ask, do people get married too? You know, I don't know, but
I mean, by outside Western people. Not the right.
It can happen, but there's a lot of obstacles. Like, let's say you kind of, you know, met someone by email that you wanted to adopt, and you wanted to bring a little Syrian girl here. It's extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. There's a lot of obstacles to it. I'm not going to say it's illegal or impossible, but they're very suspicious of any kind of arrangement like that. And what they might even accuse you of being a human smuggler for trying to adopt someone. It's very hard to get around the system. Yeah.
When I was there in Lesbos and Athens too, but in January, and when I was in Lesbos, I'm just curious if you had the same sense, but I felt very much like, I could analogize it to the Cape. And your description of Woods Hole and Martha's Vineyard was very, you made this amazed at how close Turkey is really right there. And that took me by surprise too, but that 5 miles is a very long stretch though. But at the time, and when I was there, they were still coming through, of course, and there were a lot of boats coming every day, but we did spend a lot of time in the little Greek restaurants along the shore. And my family's in the fishing industry here, and so I was interested talking to some of the restaurant owners and the men who are in the fisheries and the families and how this was affecting them. And Lesbos is very similar to the Cape. I thought, I don't know if you agree, but
I do.
It felt like I was home, and the weather was very similar. You had some days that were beautiful and others that were bitter cold in the wind and the ice. But the fishing stuff, one of the stories that I found the most compelling was that the Greeks were doing, a lot of fishermen were trying to pull up people as they would find people drowning quite frequently. And they fish alone on their boats. They don't have a crew. So they were struggling with, there were a lot of horror stories out there, people who had been traumatized by trying to save others. But also they said one of the problems they were facing was that people didn't want to buy their fish anymore. They exported because they said it was contaminated with all the death. So it was impacting them economically as well.
You can just imagine the conflicts that would even go on in your own mind. I mean, imagine if we had boats arriving here from Central America, just like, go on YouTube and look at some of the, like, there's this, just like stunning, there's YouTube of a boat of Africans arriving in Italy, and the boat hits the shore and they all just go running through the streets to try to find a place to hide or to figure out their next move. And it's a cultural conflict. I don't blame people for being afraid and not knowing how to deal with it. But there really is a shift that we have to go through in how we see people. If you're used to just like riding the bus in East Providence and holding your purse close or something, and then how do you change that mindset to see someone as first and foremost, a fellow human, rather than we live here where we don't lock our doors, we leave the keys in the car, and it's understandable. If you move to New Bedford, you're going to lock your door probably. You're not going to leave your keys in your car, and suddenly you're on the defense. And even with your own neighbors, so there's this mindset that we carry with us. I don't know. Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on your art. I just think that it does what you were just talking about. It's really beautiful, and the fact that it's a scrapbook in such a dynamic, it's just the perfect medium to express what's going on. And anyways, I just think it's very powerful.
Thank you. I know everybody wants to go. One more thing, and that is small ways to help. Just kind of like casting your vote is a cool thing. HelpRefugees.org in the UK has been doing these pop-up shops, and for like $30 you can buy a kit for a kid. Go online to their website, helprefugeesuk.org, I think it is, and look for their pop-up shops. And like right now they have like a little summer kit that has a sun hat and sunscreen and a water bottle, and for $30 you can buy a couple of the, buy a kit like this and it'll go to a kid. And they have a winter kit that has a winter coat and a sleeping pad, and then they have those Choose Love t-shirts. Just go, it's like symbolic. It's really just symbolic, but do it. Go in and like throw down $30 and buy a couple of things from their store and wear it around Truro, and I'll wave at you.